My husband abandoned me and our 6-month-old baby at a scorching Nevada gas station for his millionaire mistress, laughing as I scraped pennies for water. He thought I would die there. But 15 minutes later, a single phone call made me the heir to the largest energy conglomerate in America. 5 years later, I have returned. I am not here to beg. I am here to buy his entire life. My name is Elena Vance, and I was currently standing in the middle of hell. The thermometer on the rusted wall of this God-forsaken gas station on Route 66 read 104 degrees, turning the asphalt into a frying pan. My arms trembled not from the heat, but from the terrifying weight of reality as I clutched my 6-month-old daughter, Bella, against my chest. We were watching the taillights of our only lifeline, a silver sedan belonging to my husband, Mark, prepare to merge back onto the highway. Mark did not even step out of the car to say goodbye. He simply rolled down the window, the blast of his air conditioning hitting my face like a cruel insult before the desert heat rushed back in. He leaned out, his face twisted in a look of disdain I had never seen before, and hurled a worn-out duffel bag onto the dusty ground at my feet. "This is it! Elena!" Mark shouted over the hum of the engine, his voice devoid of any pity. "I am filing for divorce the moment I get back to the city. You are nothing but a financial burden, a dead weight dragging me down. I have ambitions, Elena, and you. You are simply not worth the cost anymore." Before I could even process the cruelty of his words, a manicured hand rested on his shoulder. Tiffany, the daughter of a real estate tycoon and the woman Mark had been seeing behind my back, leaned across the passenger seat. She adjusted her designer sunglasses and looked me up and down with a sneer that cut deeper than the sun. "God, Mark, look at her!" Tiffany laughed, her voice high and grating. "That dress looks like something she pulled out of a dumpster. Let's go, honey." The smell of poverty is giving me a headache. As the car began to move, panic seized my throat. I shifted Bella to my left hip and ran after them, my worn sandals slapping against the burning pavement. "Mark, Mark, wait," I screamed, my voice cracking as the distance between us grew. "You cannot leave us here, Mark. Please, Bella needs milk, we have nowhere to go." He did not look back. The car accelerated, kicking up a massive cloud of choking brown dust that enveloped me, forcing me to stop and cough. I watched through tear-blurred eyes as the vehicle became a speck on the horizon and then vanished completely into the shimmering heat haze. I fell to my knees in the dirt, the silence of the desert returning with a vengeance. With shaking hands, I dragged the duffel bag closer and ripped the zipper open. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned the wallet inside out, but it was empty. Not a single dollar. I scrambled for my phone, pressing the power button with frantic desperation, only to see the battery icon turn red at 2% before the screen flickered. A few diapers and a half-empty packet of wipes were all that remained. I looked up toward the gas station building, desperate for a shred of humanity. The attendant, a man with grease under his fingernails and a name tag that hung crookedly on his shirt, was watching me through the grimy glass. I stumbled toward him, pleading with my eyes, but he shook his head before I could even open my mouth. "I cannot give you a ride, lady," he called out through the screen door. "Not stepping outside into the heat. My boss would fire me if I left the post, and I do not want any trouble with domestic disputes. You can sit under the overhang if you want, but that is it." I retreated to the small patch of shade under the rusted metal awning. The heat was relentless, radiating from the concrete walls. Bella, sensing my distress and suffering from the oppressive temperature, began to wail. It was a hungry, terrified cry that tore through me. I rocked her, tears streaming down my face, mixing with the sweat and dust. I felt the world collapsing around me, crushing my chest. But as I looked at the empty road where Mark had left us to die, something shifted inside me. The sorrow began to harden. Through the tears, A cold, sharp flame of hatred ignited in my gut. He thought this was the end of Elena Vance, but as I held my screaming child, I vowed that he was wrong. The edges of my vision began to blur into a hazy white tunnel. My tongue felt like sandpaper, and the terrifying silence of my daughter in my arms signaled that she was too weak to even cry. I knew I was minutes away from passing out, and if I hit that scorching pavement, Bella and I would never wake up. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the end, but instead of the silence of death, a deep, rhythmic rumbling vibrated through the soles of my worn sandals. I forced my eyes open. Through the shimmering heat waves, a convoy of massive vehicles appeared on the horizon, tearing down Route 66 with aggressive speed. Within seconds, the gas station was surrounded. 6 black, polished Cadillac Escalades screeched to a halt, boxing me in. The tinted windows reflected the harsh sun, making them look like monoliths from another world. The door of the lead vehicle flew open, and a man stepped out. He was dressed in a 3-piece charcoal suit that defied the desert heat, looking as if he had just stepped out of a boardroom in Manhattan. He was middle-aged, with silver hair combed back perfectly and a demeanor of quiet, absolute authority. He walked straight toward me, ignoring the stunned gas station attendant, and stopped 3 feet away. To my utter shock, he bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect that felt alien in this dusty hellhole. "Mrs. Elena Vance," he asked, his voice calm and cultured. Who are you?" I rasped, my throat raw. "If you are here for the debt collectors, I have nothing. I am not a debt collector." "Madam," he replied, straightening his jacket, "my name is Arthur Pennyworth. I have been searching for you for 2 years across every state in America. I am here to fulfill the final testament of the late Mr. William Sterling." The name meant nothing to me. My legs buckled, but Arthur signaled to his men, and 2 guards in sunglasses immediately stepped forward to support me, though they kept a respectful distance. "Mr. Sterling was a pioneer in the oil industry," Arthur continued, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of sadness and relief. "And he was your grandfather." I shook my head, fighting the dizziness. "You have the wrong person. My mother. She was a waitress." "We were poor. She died with nothing. Your mother was the estranged daughter of William Sterling." Arthur corrected gently but firmly. "She left the estate 30 years ago for love, a decision that cut her off from the family fortune. Mr. Sterling spent the last decade of his life regretting his stubbornness. He died last week, Mrs. Vance, and in his will, he named you his sole, legitimate heir." The world spun faster than before. Heir to what Arthur paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle before delivering the blow that would shatter my reality. "To everything. You are now the owner of Sterling Energy, the largest energy conglomerate in the United States. Your inheritance includes a portfolio of global real estate and $10 billion in liquid assets." $10 billion, I whispered, the number sounding like a foreign language. This is a cruel joke." "Mark sent you, didn't he?" "To mock me, I assure you." "I do not know a Mark," Arthur said. Reaching into his jacket pocket, he pulled out a leather-bound folder. "Inside is the DNA comparison between you and Mr. Sterling, taken from medical records you provided to the hospital when your daughter was born. And this," he handed me a yellowed envelope, "is a letter your mother wrote to him but never sent. We found it in her old belongings. It matches his handwriting." I stared at the envelope. I recognized the loop of the L in my mother's handwriting instantly. A sob broke from my chest, violent and sudden. It was real. "We must get you out of this heat." "Madam," Arthur said, ushering me toward the open door of the Escalade. "Please." I allowed them to guide me into the back seat. The air conditioning hit me like a blessing, instantly cooling my burning skin. A woman in a white coat was already waiting inside. She immediately took Bella from my arms with practiced care, placing a tiny oxygen mask over her face and checking her vitals. She is dehydrated, but she will be fine, the doctor assured me softly. We have everything she needs here. As the convoy began to move, rolling smoothly away from the curb, I looked out the tinted window. The rusted gas station, the spot where Mark had left me to die, looked small and pathetic from the plush leather seat of a car worth more than he would earn in a lifetime. I touched the cool glass, watching the dust swirl where I had been kneeling just moments ago. "Arthur," I asked, my voice gaining a sliver of strength it had lost years ago. "Yes." "Madam," he answered from the front seat. "Get me everything you can on Mark Vance and Tiffany. Whatever her last name is, I want to know where they live, where they work, and what they owe. Consider it done," Arthur replied. I leaned back, watching the desert blur. The tears on my cheeks were drying, leaving behind a cold resolve. I would not just survive. I would destroy the man who thought I was trash. With $10 billion and the name Sterling behind me, I was going to buy his destruction, piece by piece. 5 years is a long time. It is long enough for a cell to regenerate, long enough for a child to learn to read, and long enough for a naive woman to die and be completely reborn. The Elena Vance who begged for water in the dust of the Nevada desert was buried in the sands of the past. In her place stood Elena Sterling. I did not simply inherit a fortune, I conquered it. The last 60 months were a blur of sleepless nights and relentless pressure. I hired the most ruthless sharks on Wall Street to teach me how to swallow competitors whole. I took etiquette lessons not to fit in, but to learn how to look down on people with a polite smile. I learned to read balance sheets like poetry and legal contracts like weapon manuals. My softness was chiseled away, layer by layer, until only diamond remained. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my penthouse office. My hair, once long and unkempt, was now a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed my face like a blade. I wore a bespoke blazer from Paris that cost more than Mark used to earn in 2 years. My eyes, once filled with tears, were now dry and cold. When I walked into a room, conversations stopped. Men who used to dismiss me now scrambled to open doors, terrified of my displeasure. "Mommy," I turned to see Bella running into the room. At 5.5 years old, she was radiant. Gone was the sickly infant gasping for air. She was dressed in a velvet dress, holding a violin case, fresh from her private lesson. "Did you practice your scales?" "My love," I asked, kneeling to smooth her hair. "Yes, Mr. Holloway said I am getting much better." She beamed. "Good girl. Go ask Nanny to get you a snack. Mommy has to finish some work." As she skipped away, my smile vanished. I walked back to my desk, a slab of black marble, and opened the dossier Arthur had placed there earlier. It was thick with photos and financial reports. The subjects Mark and Tiffany. They had married 4 years ago, a lavish wedding paid for by debt. They were currently running Tiffany's family business, rebranded as Zenith Global. On the surface, they looked like a power couple, but the numbers told a different story. "Arthur," I said, pressing the intercom. "Come in." Arthur entered, looking as impeccable as the day we met. "The report on Zenith Global is fascinating," I said, tapping the paper. "Mark has been siphoning company funds for sports cars and gambling trips to Macau. And Tiffany. It seems she invested heavily in a cryptocurrency scam and a failed luxury resort in the Bahamas. They are bleeding money." "Madam," Arthur confirmed. "They have leveraged every asset they own. The banks are circling. They are desperate for a lifeline." "Desperation makes people stupid," I murmured, flipping to a photo of Mark. He looked older, bloated from alcohol and stress. Tiffany looked gaunt, her smile in the paparazzi photos strained and fake. "It is time," I declared. "Activate Phoenix Capital." Phoenix Capital was a shell company I had established solely for this purpose. It had no history, only a massive amount of capital and a mysterious CEO who allegedly specialized in saving distressed companies. "You want to acquire them?" Arthur asked. "No," I replied, staring at Mark's face. "I want to gut them. We will offer them a buyout, a glimmer of hope. We will make them believe they are saved. And then, when the spotlight is on them, I will reveal exactly who holds the leash. This is not just about bankruptcy. Arthur, I want their reputation in tatters. I want their pride crushed. I want Mark to feel the exact same helplessness I felt when he drove away." Arthur nodded slowly. "I will set up the meeting. Phoenix Capital will reach out tomorrow. Make sure they know we are their only option," I said, closing the file. "I want them to come crawling to us." Before I severed the head of the snake, I intended to crush its tail. My first target was not Mark, but the woman who had whispered poison into his ear for years. Joyce Vance, my former mother-in-law. She was a woman who used to inspect my fingernails for dirt every time I entered her house and told anyone who would listen that her son had married beneath him, to the public. However, Joyce was a saint. She was the chairperson of the City Benevolent Fund, a charity organization designed to help underprivileged children. It was a perfect mask for a monster. But masks are fragile things. The report is conclusive. "Madam," the lead investigator from my security team said, sliding a tablet across my desk. "She has been skimming off the top for 5 years, but recently, it escalated. She is addicted to underground poker. She has embezzled over $500,000 in the last 6 months alone to cover her losses at a hidden casino in the warehouse district." I scrolled through the evidence. Bank transfers disguised as administrative costs flowed directly into offshore gambling accounts. There were even grainy videos of her, cigarette in hand, betting money meant for starving children on a bad hand of blackjack. "Perfect," I whispered. "Let's give her the recognition she deserves." Using Phoenix Capital as a shield, I made an anonymous donation of $1 million to her foundation. With one stipulation, the organization had to hold a massive gala to honor Joyce's lifetime of service. Her ego took the bait immediately. The night of the gala was glittering with excess. I did not attend in person, of course. I watched from a secure live feed in my office, sipping a glass of sparkling water. Joyce stood on the stage in a shimmering gold gown, basking in the applause of the city's elite. She looked like a queen, unaware that the guillotine blade was already falling. "I am so humbled," Joyce said into the microphone, feigning a tear. "Every penny we raise goes to the children. They are my heart. They are my soul. Now." I commanded into my headset. My operatives in the control room seized the system. The massive LED screen behind Joyce, which had been displaying heartwarming photos of orphans, flickered violently. The music cut out. A hush fell over the crowd. Suddenly, the screen lit up with high-definition footage of Joyce sitting at a felt table in a smoky basement. The audio was crisp, double down. The Joyce on the screen growled, throwing a stack of chips, "And pour me another drink. If I lose, I will just write another check from the charity account." "Who cares? Those brats won't know the difference." Gasps erupted in the ballroom. It sounded like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room at once. On stage, Joyce turned pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "No," she shrieked into the microphone, the feedback whining. This is a fake, deep fake artificial intelligence, turn it off." But the screen then flashed bank statements, highlighting the transfers with red lines. The dates matched the gambling timestamps perfectly. Before the crowd could recover from the shock, the double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. A squad of police officers, accompanied by federal agents, marched down the center aisle. The cameras from the news networks, which I had ensured were present to cover the donation, swiveled instantly to capture the raid live. Joyce Vance, the lead officer, shouted, his voice booming, "You are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Put your hands behind your back." I switched the feed on my second monitor to the local news channel. The headline, "Charity Scandal," was already flashing in bold red letters. I imagined Mark and Tiffany sitting in their crumbling mansion, watching this nightmare unfold. They would be terrified. They would be wondering who had the power to access those bank records and who hated Joyce enough to humiliate her on national television. They would never suspect the girl from the gas station. On the main screen, Joyce was fighting the officers, kicking and screaming as they slapped handcuffs on her wrists. Her expensive gown tangled around her legs as they dragged her off the stage. "I was framed," she screamed, her face contorted and ugly. "You cannot do this to me. I am a pillar of this community. It was a setup, Mark. Call Mark." But Mark could not help her. No one could. The crowd watched with disdain, whispering and pointing as the woman who once judged the world was dragged away in disgrace. I turned off the monitors, the silence of my office returning. One down. Two to go. With Joyce rotting in a holding cell, the silence in the Vance household must have been deafening, but I did not give them a moment to breathe. My crosshairs shifted immediately to Tiffany. She was not just the woman who stole my husband. She was a parasite who fed on the admiration of others. She called herself a fashion designer, claiming her brand, Ethereal by Tiffany, was the pinnacle of sustainable luxury. In reality, she was a fraud who knew more about spending money than earning it. Tiffany was desperate to launch her fall collection, a show she believed would cement her status as a global icon. However, with Zenith Global drowning in debt, banks had laughed her out of their offices. That was when my proxy at Phoenix Capital stepped in. We offered to sponsor the entire event, providing $5 million in funding. The only condition was that the show had to be broadcast live on national television and streamed to millions of viewers worldwide. Tiffany, blinded by vanity, signed the contract without hesitation. "This is it, Mark," I heard her say through the bugged phone line a week before the show. "I am going to be famous. Phoenix Capital sees my genius. Once this show airs, we will be richer than your mother ever was." She had no idea that I had spent the previous month acquiring her secret supply chain. Tiffany claimed her clothes were hand-stitched in Italy. The truth, which I discovered after buying the facility, was that she imported cheap synthetic garments from a sweatshop, cut off the Made in China tags, and sewed on her own gold-embossed labels. The markup was 5,000%. The night of the show arrived. The venue was a converted cathedral, dripping with crystals and filled with the city's elite. I sat in a private box high above the runway, hidden in the shadows. Below me, the lights dimmed, and the music swelled. Tiffany's voice echoed over the speakers, talking about purity and high-quality craftsmanship. The models began to strut down the catwalk. The clothes looked passable from a distance, shimmering under the spotlights. But as the finale approached and Tiffany stepped out to take her bow, I pressed a single button on my tablet, high above the stage. The fire suppression system roared to life, but it was not water that sprayed down on the runway. I had bribed the venue's maintenance chief to fill the reserve tank with a specific mild chemical solvent designed to dissolve low-grade synthetic polymers, the exact material Tiffany used for her entire collection. "What is happening?" Tiffany shrieked, shielding her hair as the liquid rained down. "Turn it off. You are ruining my moment." Then, the horror started. As the solvent reacted with the cheap fabric, the dresses on the models began to disintegrate. Sleeves melted away like cotton candy in water. Skirts dissolved into gooey, tattered rags, leaving the models exposed and screaming in shock. The audience gasped, rising to their feet in confusion. Simultaneously, I hijacked the massive screens behind the stage. The logo of her brand vanished, replaced by shaky, hidden camera footage I had commissioned from her factory. It showed exhausted workers in a dingy room, sewing ethereal labels onto dollar store shirts. The audio played a recording of Tiffany herself yelling at a supplier, "I do not care if the fabric is flammable, just make it look expensive and keep it under $2 a unit." The crowd turned instantly. Confusion shifted to outrage. People began booing, throwing their complimentary gift bags onto the soggy stage. "No, no!" Tiffany screamed, running toward the edge of the runway, her own custom dress melting off her body to reveal her shapewear. She grabbed a microphone, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. "This is a lie. These stupid models ruined my clothes. It is their fault. They are sabotaging me." The cameras zoomed in on her face. She did not look like an heiress or a visionary. She looked like a cornered rat. "My stock." Mark's voice could be heard from the VIP section, though he was not on camera. "Tiffany, the stock is plummeting. We are losing millions by the second." Tiffany fell to her knees in the puddle of dissolved fabric and chemical water. She sobbed, not out of remorse, but out of pure, selfish humiliation. "It is not my fault," she wailed into the microphone, her voice cracking. "I am the victim here. Why is everyone being so mean to me?" I watched the live feed of the stock market on my phone. The shares of her family's company were in free fall, erasing her inheritance in real time. I took a sip of my champagne and turned away. The fashion icon was naked, in every sense of the word. Mark sat alone in the corner office of Zenith Global, a glass of scotch trembling in his hand. The silence in the building was heavy, broken only by the hum of the server room down the hall. With his mother awaiting trial and Tiffany disgraced, the wolves were circling. Zenith Global was bleeding cash, and Mark was the only one left to stop the hemorrhage. That was when the psychological warfare began. I did not just want to bankrupt him, I wanted to haunt him. It started on a Tuesday. Mark received a package wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Inside was a single plastic bottle of water. It was not a luxury brand. It was cheap, warm, and the label was faded, identical to the ones sold at that wretched gas station on Route 66. "What is this joke?" Mark muttered to his empty room, tossing the bottle into the trash. "Some kind of prank." The next day, a second package arrived. Inside was a single unused disposable diaper. Mark stared at it, his breath hitching in his throat. He poured himself another drink, his hands shaking violently as he dialed security. "Who delivered this?" he screamed into the phone. "I want names, I want the footage checked now." But the courier was a ghost, hired through layers of shell companies. On the third day, the final item arrived, a small, die-cast model of a silver sedan. It was the exact make and model of the car he had driven away in 5 years ago. Paranoia began to eat him alive. I watched him through the hidden cameras I had installed in his office weeks ago. He was pacing, muttering to himself, his eyes darting to the shadows. "It cannot be her," he whispered, clutching the edge of his mahogany desk until his knuckles turned white. "Elena is dead. She has to be. No one survives out there. Not without money. It is just stress." He tried to reach out to his old business partners, the men who used to slap him on the back at the country club. One by one, they ghosted him. Emails bounced back. Calls went straight to voicemail. He was toxic. Then came the lifeline. An email from Phoenix Capital, requesting a meeting to discuss a full acquisition of Zenith Global. Mark wept with relief. He saw it as his salvation, unaware it was his execution. Desperation breeds arrogance. Mark knew Zenith was worthless, filled with bad debt and hollow assets. To secure the deal, he spent 2 nights cooking the books. He inflated revenue projections by 300% and hid the massive liabilities in offshore accounts. He smiled as he printed the falsified reports, believing he was outsmarting the mysterious investors. He had no idea that I already had the real books on my desk. The meeting took place in a neutral conference room downtown. I did not attend. Instead, I sent Arthur. Mark walked in, looking haggard, dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. "Mr. Vance," Arthur said, sliding a thick contract across the table. "Phoenix Capital is willing to buy your debt and acquire Zenith, provided the financial health of the company is exactly as you have stated in these reports." Mark nodded eagerly, sweat beading on his forehead. "It is solid. The numbers are... they are all there. We just had a run of bad luck with the press." "Very well," Arthur said, his voice devoid of emotion. "However, due to the recent scandals involving your family, our board insists on a strict liability clause, page 42, paragraph 7. It states that if any financial data is found to be fraudulent, the seller forfeits all personal assets, real estate, and rights to legal defense, and accepts full criminal liability." Mark hesitated. His pen hovered over the paper. For a second, his survival instinct flared. He looked at the fine print. This is highly unusual," Mark stammered. "It puts everything I own at risk." Arthur stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Then we walk. Good luck with the bankruptcy courts. Mr. Vance?" Mark looked at the door. He looked at the crushing weight of his life collapsing. Greed and fear overpowered his reason. He convinced himself he could get away with the lie one last time. "No, wait," Mark said, his voice trembling. "I will sign. Just give me the pen." He scrawled his signature on the dotted line. I watched the feed from my penthouse, a cold smile touching my lips. He had just signed his own death warrant. The elevator ascended to the 90th floor of the Sterling Tower with a silence that was almost deafening. This was the summit of the city, a place Mark had spent his entire mediocre career gazing up at with envy. Yet, he had never been permitted to set foot here. Today, he walked out of the polished steel doors believing he was about to save his skin. He adjusted his tie in the reflection of the glass walls, completely unaware that he was stepping into a mausoleum he had built for himself. I watched him enter the boardroom through the reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. I was seated at the head of the massive obsidian conference table, my high-backed leather chair turned away from the room, facing the sprawling metropolis below. I did not turn around when I heard his footsteps on the marble floor. Mark stopped in his tracks as he took in the scene. The minority shareholders of Zenith Global, the men and women he had dragged down with his incompetence, were already seated. They were not chatting or reviewing documents. They sat in terrified silence, their faces pale, hands clasped tightly on the table. They knew who I was. They knew what was coming. "Gentlemen, ladies," Mark announced, his voice booming with a false bravado that echoed awkwardly in the cold room. Why the long faces today is a day of celebration. "The merger with Phoenix Capital is going to turn everything around." No one answered him. One of the older board members, a man named Henderson, looked down at his lap, unable to meet Mark's eyes. Mark cleared his throat, clearly unsettled by the lack of response, but his arrogance pushed him forward. He looked toward the back of my chair. "You must be the CEO," Mark said, directing his charm at my back. "It is an honor. I have prepared a brief presentation to highlight the synergy between our firms. As you saw in the reports, Zenith is poised for a 20% growth next quarter. Our liabilities are merely temporary setbacks caused by external market forces." He began to pace, his confidence growing with every lie that spilled from his mouth. I listened to him weave a fantasy of profit and stability. He spoke of assets that did not exist and contracts that were forged. It was a pathetic performance. "We are not just selling a company," Mark continued. gesturing grandly to the silent room. "We are selling a legacy, a vision. I have dedicated my life to building this, sacrificing my time and energy to ensure—" "You can stop now," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the air like a razor blade. It was not the timid whisper of the woman he knew 5 years ago. It was the voice of a woman who commanded billions. Mark froze mid-sentence. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. He took a half-step forward, confusion warping his features. "Excuse me," Mark asked, his voice wavering slightly. "I do not think I heard you correctly." "I said you can stop lying," I repeated, my tone devoid of warmth. "You are talking about sacrifice. Mark, that is rich coming from you." Who is this?" Mark demanded, a flicker of panic igniting in his eyes. "Show yourself." I remained still, staring at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the city. "You still lie as well as the day you said you were going to buy water and then left your wife and child to die in the desert." "Mark," I said clearly. The sound of his breath hitching was audible across the room. The air conditioning hummed, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "How do you—" Mark stammered, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. That is impossible." I pressed the button on the armrest. The hydraulic motor whirred softly, and the chair began to rotate. Slowly, deliberately. As I turned to face him, I saw the blood drain from his face until he looked like a corpse standing upright. I was not wearing rags. I was dressed in a tailored white suit that cost more than his car, my hair sharp and styled, my eyes locking onto his with predatory focus. Mark stumbled back, gripping the edge of the table for support. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked as if he was seeing a ghost. "Hello, Mark?" I said, leaning forward slightly, a cold smile playing on my lips. "It has been 5 years. Did you miss me?" Mark stared at me, his eyes wide and blinking rapidly as if trying to clear a hallucination. He looked at my white suit, then at the expensive furniture of the boardroom, and his mind desperately grasped for a logic that fit his narrow world view. "Elena," he stammered, his voice trembling with a pathetic mixture of confusion and arrogance. What are you doing here? Did you get a job here? Are you the help? Did you bring coffee? You are not supposed to be in here." The insult was so predictable it almost made me laugh. Instead, I picked up the heavy black folder containing the acquisition contract, the one he had just signed with his own hand, and hurled it across the long table. It slid aggressively across the polished mahogany, stopping inches from his shaking hands. "I am not the help." "Mark," I said, my voice projecting clearly to every corner of the silent room. "I am the chairman of Phoenix Capital, and as of 5 minutes ago, I am the owner of your company and the only creditor you have left in this world." That is insane," Mark whispered, looking around at the shareholders for support, but they were staring at me with a mixture of awe and terror. You were destitute. You were nothing. You cannot be the chairman I had a memory," I replied coldly. "And I have the receipts." I picked up a remote and pointed it at the massive wall screen behind me. The image of the Golden City skyline vanished, replaced by a grainy, time-stamped video. It was footage from a security camera, dated exactly 5 years ago. The resolution was low, but the image was unmistakable. It showed a silver sedan idling at a dusty gas station. It showed a man throwing a bag into the dirt. It showed a woman running after the car, a baby in her arms, falling to her knees in the dust as the car sped away. A collective gasp swept through the room. One of the female board members covered her mouth with her hand, looking from the screen to Mark with pure disgust. "You left your wife and infant daughter to die in 40-degree heat," I narrated, my eyes never leaving his face. I bought this footage from the station owner the day after I survived. I have watched it every single day since, just to remind myself of who you really are. No, Mark shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the screen, sweat pouring down his face. That is fake. It is a deep fake AI generated. She is lying to you. She is trying to frame me. I never did that. Is this fake too? Mark? I asked, pressing the button again. The screen changed instantly. Now it displayed two spreadsheets side by side. On the left was the fraudulent financial report Mark had submitted to Phoenix Capital. On the right were the actual bank records of Zenith Global, showing massive debts, gambling withdrawals, and embezzlement. You cooked the books, I stated flatly. You inflated your assets by 300% to trick me into buying this sinking ship, and you just signed a contract stating that if you lied about these numbers, you forfeit all personal assets. You walked right into the trap. Suddenly, the double doors burst open. Tiffany rushed in, her hair disheveled and her eyes wild, looking nothing like the polished socialite she pretended to be. She was hysterical. "Mark," she screamed, ignoring the room full of people. "You have to do something. My accounts are frozen. The press is outside my house. They are taking my car. You have to fix this." She stopped dead in her tracks as she reached the table. Her eyes locked onto me. She stopped breathing. Elena, she wheezed, her hand going to her throat. "Hello?" "Tiffany," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "I enjoyed your fashion show. It was very revealing." Tiffany grabbed the back of a chair, looking like she was about to faint. You did that. You ruined me. I did all of it," I said, standing up and walking slowly toward the end of the table where they stood. "I bought your debts. I bought your loans. I bought the mortgage on your house. I own the clothes on your backs and the ground you are standing on. I did not do this for profit. I did it to see you exactly where you are right now, terrified, bankrupt, and completely on your knees." Mark looked at me, then at the screen, then at the horrified shareholders who were now looking at him like he was a disease. The reality of his destruction finally snapped something inside him. His face twisted into a mask of pure, primal rage. "You witch," he roared, his eyes bulging. "You think you can take everything from me? I will kill you!" He lunged across the table, knocking over a pitcher of water, his hands reaching for my throat. But he never made it. Two of my personal bodyguards, who had been blending into the shadows, moved with lightning speed. Before Mark could take 3 steps, he was slammed face first onto the mahogany table. His arm was twisted behind his back with a sickening crunch. "Get off me!" Mark grunted, spitting saliva onto the wood as he struggled uselessly against the weight of the guard. "Let me go. She is lying. Let me go." I stood over him, looking down at his squashed face against the wood. I felt no fear, only a cold, satisfying sense of closure. The man who had once loomed so large in my nightmares was just a small, broken insect under my heel. The commotion caused by Mark's attempted assault was cut short by the sound of heavy boots striking the marble floor. The double doors, which had just admitted a hysterical Tiffany, now swung open to reveal the final players in this tragedy. Arthur walked in, looking as composed as ever, but this time he was flanked by 4 men in navy blue windbreakers emblazoned with 3 yellow letters FBI. Behind them were uniformed officers from the Economic Crimes Division. The boardroom fell into a terrified silence. The bodyguards who had pinned Mark to the table stepped back, allowing the federal agents to take their place. They hauled Mark off the mahogany surface and slammed him against the wall, pulling his arms behind his back with practiced efficiency. "What is this?" Mark shouted, his face pressed against the silk wallpaper. "You have no jurisdiction here. I want My lawyer, Arthur, stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. He held a document in his hands. Not a contract this time, but an indictment. Your lawyer cannot help you. Mr. Vance, Arthur said, his voice cutting through the room like a gavel. I am here to serve you with a federal warrant. You are being charged with 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of securities fraud based on the falsified documents you just submitted to Phoenix Capital, and 1 count of gross embezzlement. Mark struggled against the cuffs, his breathing ragged. I was entrapped. She tricked me into signing that you signed a binding legal agreement stating your financials were accurate, Arthur continued, his tone devoid of pity. By signing that document while knowing it was false, you triggered the forfeiture clause. As of this moment, every asset listed in your name, your home, your vehicles, your private accounts is now the property of Phoenix Capital to cover the breach of contract. You are not just going to prison. Mark, you are going to prison penniless. While Mark hyperventilated, 2 officers approached Tiffany. She backed away, knocking over a chair. Do not touch me, Tiffany shrieked, her hands trembling. I did nothing, I am just a fashion designer, Tiffany Stone, an officer announced, grabbing her wrist and snapping the metal cuffs tight. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, tax evasion, and multiple violations of international labor laws regarding your manufacturing facilities. We have the testimony from your factory managers. It is over. No. Tiffany sobbed, her knees buckling as they dragged her toward the door. Mark, do something. Tell them who my father is. Mark could do nothing. He was slumped against the wall, held up only by the grip of the agents. I walked slowly from the head of the table, my heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. The sound was the only thing audible over Tiffany's weeping. I stopped 2 feet in front of Mark. He looked up at me, sweat and tears mixing on his bruised face. He looked small. He looked pathetic. I looked down at him, my expression unmoving. I felt no joy, only a cold, hard sense of balance being restored. You left me at a gas station because I was poor, I said softly, ensuring he heard every word. You threw me away like garbage because you thought I had no value. Now, I am richer than your entire family put together. I could buy this whole city if I wanted to, but I will not give you a single penny. Mark, not even to buy a bottle of water. Mark stared at me, his eyes searching mine for any trace of the woman he used to bully. He found no one. Desperation clawed at his throat. He realized his money was gone, his freedom was gone, and his pride was destroyed. He played his final card. Elena, please. Mark choked out, his voice cracking. I am sorry. Okay, I am sorry. But think about Bella. She is my daughter. We have blood ties. You cannot keep a father from his daughter. I have rights. Please. Just let me see her once. For the sake of our child. The room held its breath. The mention of the child was a low blow, a desperate attempt to manipulate my maternal instinct. I leaned in closer until my face was inches from his. I let the silence hang for a second, watching the hope flicker in his eyes. You have no daughter, I whispered, my voice as cold as the desert night. Bella's father died at that gas station 5 years ago. I straightened up and turned my back on him. Get them out of my building, I ordered. As the agents began to drag him away, Mark's scream echoed through the hallway, a sound of pure, agonized regret that would likely haunt him for the rest of his miserable life. But as the elevator doors closed, cutting off his voice, I felt nothing but peace. The elevator doors in the lobby slid open, but Mark and Tiffany were not greeted by the silence of disgrace. Instead, they were met by a wall of blinding white light. I had tipped off every major news network in the city exactly 1 hour ago. Hundreds of reporters were jammed into the atrium, their microphones thrust forward like spears, desperate to capture the fall of the Vance dynasty. From my vantage point on the 90th floor, I watched the chaos unfold on the monitors. The police officers, unbothered by the press, dragged Mark and Tiffany through the sea of flashing cameras. Mark tried to hide his face with his shoulder, hunched over and defeated, while Tiffany stumbled in her heels, her makeup ruined, looking like a ghost of the woman who had mocked my poverty. Then, the final stroke of my revenge lit up the sky. I had programmed the massive electronic billboards wrapping around the exterior of the Sterling Tower to change at this exact moment. On the left side of the screen was a photo of Mark from 5 years ago, arrogant, smiling, holding a champagne glass. On the right side was the live feed of him right now handcuffed, weeping, and broken. The caption underneath read in bold, unforgiving letters, "Greed has a price." I stood by the window, looking down at the ants scurrying on the pavement below. I waited for a pang of guilt. I waited for a tear of nostalgia for the husband I once loved. But it never came. My chest felt light, unburdened for the first time since that day in the desert. The hatred that had fueled me was gone, replaced by a profound, quiet peace. The heavy oak door to the boardroom creaked open. "Mommy." I turned around instantly, the cold mask of the CEO melting away to reveal the mother, Bella, fresh from her private school and still wearing her plaid uniform, ran across the room. My head of security had brought her up the private elevator to spare her the madness downstairs. "Bella." I knelt down, opening my arms just in time to catch her. She smelled of vanilla and crayons, the scent of innocence that Mark had tried to destroy. She pulled back slightly, her big eyes looking confused. "Mommy." I saw policemen downstairs, and there was a man screaming while they took him to the car. He was looking at the building and yelling your name. Who was that noisy man? I brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. I thought about Mark. I thought about the man who claimed rights to her only when he had lost everything else. I looked into my daughter's eyes, and I knew the truth. Biology did not make a father. Love did. And Mark had loved only himself. He was nobody. "Sweetheart," I said softly, kissing her forehead. "Just a stranger who got lost a long time ago. He does not matter anymore." Bella nodded, accepting the answer with the easy trust of a child. "Okay. Can we go get ice cream now?" "You promised." "We certainly can." I smiled, standing up and lifting her onto my hip. Before we left, I walked back to the obsidian table one last time. The dissolution papers for Zenith Global were sitting there, waiting for a signature. I picked up my pen and signed my name with a flourish. Zenith Global was officially dead. I had already instructed Arthur regarding the building. It would not be sold. Instead, the former headquarters of Mark's Vanity would be gutted and transformed into the new Horizon Center, a fully funded sanctuary for single mothers who had nowhere else to turn. No woman would ever be left behind again. Not on my watch. I took Bella's hand. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. We walked toward the exit, leaving the empty boardroom and the ghosts of the past behind us. As the heavy doors clicked shut, the darkness was sealed away forever. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with our community. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and press the hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next video.